Hello. My name is Claire Bennett, and I was once the forewoman of a textile factory that burned to the ground twice. Once in life, once in death. This is the story of how betrayal scorched deeper than the fire ever could, and how fate, against all odds, gave me a second chance to watch the wolves burn. The first thing that hit me was the smoke, acrid, thick, and so real it yanked me out of the darkness, like a slap to the face. I opened my eyes, and the world swirled in gray plumes, the shrill alarm of panic rising in the background. My heart thundered, not from fear, but from memory. I knew this day. I had lived it before. The inferno had taken the factory, 5 innocent lives, my reputation, and eventually my own blood-soaked breath. But not this time. Not again. I stood rooted near the factory gate, surrounded by hysteria. Women screamed, men shouted instructions, and through the smoke I saw his face, Jason Clark, my boyfriend, the man who had once stood beside me, only to turn into my executioner. His brows were knitted in righteous fury, jaw clenched as he barked my name like a curse. Claire Bennett. Melissa's still inside, and you locked the goddamn door. His voice cut through the chaos like glass. Behind him, a sea of female workers glared at me with the kind of disgust reserved for monsters. She's one of us. How could you abandon her? Their accusations wrapped around my throat tighter than the smoke ever had. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The weight of my last death still clung to my skin like soot. I had begged these same people to evacuate last time, pleaded until my knees bled on concrete. They spat on me then too. They called me selfish, jealous, a murderer. Melissa Zhang, their darling, their so-called sister, had cried pretty crocodile tears and called me envious of her connection to Jason. They believed her, not me. They always did. I could have screamed that I had checked the building, that I had combed every floor, and called out into the smoke for stragglers. But I didn't. What was the point? The past had already shown me what came of explaining myself to the deaf. Instead, I slowly reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the master key to the factory. I held it up like an offering. "If you're so sure she's in there," I said calmly, voice as flat as the ashes soon to come, "go get her." The security guard, Mr. Holton, a kind older man with a permanent frown etched into his face, stepped forward, blocking their way. "You can't just go in there. Claire already searched. It's too dangerous," but Jason shoved him aside, snarling, "Don't tell me what to do. I know Melissa's still inside. She wouldn't leave without saying a word." He snatched the key from my hand, and before I could say another word, he and nearly 20 workers rushed into the smoke like they were on a war mission. Righteous and blind. I didn't follow. I turned and found a hydrant, pulled out the hose, and began spraying down the perimeter. If nothing else, I would prevent the fire from spreading to the nearby storerooms, the ones full of highly flammable dyes. The wind shifted, and the smoke slapped me across the face like an old insult. My eyes burned, but not from the heat. No, this was fury. A cold, calculated fury born not from fear, but anticipation. Let them go. Let them all follow her in. They needed to see it with their own eyes, the truth that I already knew. 20 minutes passed before Jason reemerged, dragging Melissa by the arm. They stumbled out together, surrounded by soot-covered workers who wheezed and coughed like war survivors. And yet Melissa was spotless. Not a smudge on her ivory coat. Her hair still curled in perfect waves, her expression wide-eyed with feigned vulnerability. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching Jason's sleeve like a damsel saved from dragons. "I knew you wouldn't abandon me." I watched her eyes meet mine. There it was. That glint. That flicker of malice dressed in gratitude. Like last time. She gave me a look that said, "You're the only one who knows." Because I was. I was the only one who knew she'd started the fire. That she'd panicked after sneaking a cigarette near the fabric piles, then tossed the lit butt behind a crate and left it to fate. I was the one who had confiscated her lighter. The one who'd warned her. The one who tried to save them all. And still, they called me villain. Jason turned and touched Melissa's hair like she was a porcelain doll. "I'll never leave you behind," he said softly. Around them, the others clapped.
Some cried.
A victory, they thought. A hero's welcome. I checked my watch. 32 minutes. The machine room would detonate in less than half an hour. But none of them noticed. None of them looked around to realize that 5 of their own were still unaccounted for. Because they had Melissa. That was all that mattered. I stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed, a shadow. I was no longer their forewoman. I was the ghost of a lesson they refused to learn. I crossed my arms and leaned against the fence, letting the wind tangle my hair. The smoke was thicker now. The air, hotter. The pressure building inside the walls was almost audible, like a ticking clock. And still, the chorus of self-congratulation continued. We did the right thing. We saved a life today. Melissa is safe, thank God. No one mentioned the 5 women who hadn't come out. Not until one of them, a short girl with braids, suddenly looked around and frowned. Wait. Where's Yanni? She whispered. Her voice cracked through the noise like a snapped wire. And where's Liza? I thought she was right behind me. A ripple of confusion spread. Did anyone see Margie?
No.
She went in with us, right? What about Denise and Carla? And then, like dominoes, silence fell. 5 names. 5 absences. 5 lives. Jason's face paled. He turned toward the building like it could offer answers. They probably left early, he mumbled, clearly lying to himself. Went home through the back gate. I cleared my throat. Loud enough to cut the quiet. I've been standing here the whole time. No one left early. No one came out except the 22 who went in. My voice was like a blade, slicing through his excuses. Panic bloomed like fire, quiet at first, then roaring. Oh God. They're still in there. Jenny Fox's face turned ghost white. Her lips trembled. My sister's one of them. She went in after me. The crowd turned to Jason like children demanding answers from a careless parent. But Jason had none. Only guilt in his eyes and smoke in his lungs. I looked at the factory. My memory, still so fresh from the last life, told me what came next. I could hear the groaning of the steel frames inside, the unstable rumble of pressure building in the dye tanks. I had tried to save them once. This time I wouldn't. This time, I wanted them to see what happens when you choose lies over reason, vanity over truth. Jason gathered himself, puffing up like a commander. Everyone stay calm. We can put the fire out. Let's grab hoses, water buckets, whatever we can, but I cut him off with a laugh. A single, bitter laugh that made heads turn. You think you can fight that with hoses? I asked. You think courage is going to stop an explosion? He scowled. What's your problem, Claire? Don't you care people are missing? I do, I said quietly. That's why I told you not to go in the first place. You didn't listen then. Why would I expect you to listen now? The wind picked up. The factory groaned. I looked down at my watch. 13 minutes. I folded my arms tighter. This time I wouldn't run. This time, I would watch the fire speak for me. The sky had begun to dim, not from sunset, but from the growing veil of smoke that thickened the air like an omen. I watched the factory walls tremble ever so slightly, like a monster preparing to exhale its final breath. My hands were calm, but inside, something twisted and bitter coiled tighter with each passing second. I could feel the weight of 2 lifetimes pressing down on my chest, the one where I died begging for reason, and this one, where I stood silent and let justice right itself in flames. Jason was shouting again, his voice fraying at the edges. We can't just stand here. There are still people inside. Grab the hoses. Move. He had the desperation of a man who had just realized the hero costume didn't come with instructions. But the others hesitated. The crowd that once cheered his courage now murmured with unease, their faces reflecting the same thought. Maybe this wasn't a story of bravery, but of foolish pride. Melissa was still beside him, her face carefully arranged in a mask of concern. She wrung her hands, but not a single speck of soot dared touch her pristine skin. Jason, she whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. They were only trying to save me. Maybe we should go in again. We can't leave them behind. Her words floated on the air like perfume sweet, intoxicating and poisonous. I tilted my head, observing the way her crocodile tears welled with perfect timing. Even now, even with 5 lives dangling over the edge of tragedy, she still played the role of the misunderstood angel. The workers, blinded by her performance, began nodding. She's right, one woman said. We saved her. We can save the others. Another chimed in. We're not cowards. We're sisters. We don't leave our own behind. I looked at their faces, some pale with fear, others flushed with adrenaline, but none with the clarity of truth. They weren't rushing back in because they cared. They were chasing absolution, redemption for a mistake they refused to admit. I raised my arm and glanced at the time. 9 minutes. Jenny Fox stepped forward, her lips quivering. My sister's still in there, she said, voice barely a whisper. Claire, please. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something that wasn't hate or suspicion, just raw desperation. I could have softened. I could have offered comfort. But the memory of her slap, the way she kicked me and screamed that I was a murderer, flared like a fresh wound. So I said nothing. Jason, emboldened by the swelling emotion, puffed his chest. We go back in. This time, we get them all. He turned to Melissa, gripping her hand. I'll protect you. Just stay close. She nodded, doe-eyed and silent, the picture of innocence. I watched them both with the kind of detachment reserved for tragedies you've already mourned. But then the wind shifted. A low, ominous groan rolled from deep within the factory. The earth seemed to shudder beneath us. And then it happened. A thunderous crack split the air, followed by a roar of fire and force that sent a shockwave ripping through the yard. The explosion bloomed like a demon's blossom, bright, terrible, final. The front wall of the factory crumbled in on itself, spraying metal and debris across the concrete like shrapnel. The heat slammed into us, pushing the crowd backward in a wave of screaming bodies and flying dust. People were on the ground, coughing, crying, bleeding. One woman lay sprawled on the asphalt, her head bleeding from a metal beam that had struck her mid-run. Jenny screamed and bolted toward the collapsing structure, only to be dragged back by a group of workers. No. My sister. My sister's in there, she wailed, clawing at their arms. Jason stumbled to his knees, his face slack with horror. No, this can't be, he whispered. His hands trembled as he looked at the blackened sky, as if trying to pray it all away. Melissa clung to him, her mask beginning to crack at the edges, her eyes darting toward the crowd like a rabbit spotting wolves in the brush. But no one was looking at her. They were all staring at the factory, at the smoldering ruin, the silence where 5 voices had once screamed. The firefighters arrived seconds later, sirens wailing like banshees. But they didn't rush in with heroism. The fire chief stormed up to Jason with fire in his eyes and rage in his voice. Whose red car is that blocking the east entrance? He barked. Jason blinked. Mine, he said, like he didn't understand the question. We lost 10 minutes trying to get around your goddamn car, the chief snapped. 10 minutes. You might as well have lit the fire yourself. The accusation hit harder than any punch. Jason opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The crowd began murmuring again, this time not about me, but about him. Melissa edged away from Jason, no longer clutching his hand, now shifting closer to the workers, aligning herself with their fear. I almost laughed. The loyalty of wolves is only skin deep. Familiar voices began to rise again, blame this time, not praise. He said it was safe. We followed him. He told us Claire was lying. My wife's still in there because of him. The words came fast, angry, raw. I stood still, letting the wind whip my hair around my face like a banner of truth. This wasn't my fire. Not anymore. Jenny collapsed onto the ground, sobbing into her palms. You said she'd be okay. You said it was safe. Jason couldn't meet her eyes. Melissa took a step back, Then another, her expression caught in the headlights of consequence. She tried to speak, but her voice was brittle. "It's not Jason's fault," she said. It's the fire. It's no one's fault." A silence settled, colder than the smoke. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jenny lifted her head, eyes red and wild.
You
said Claire was lying. You convinced us to follow Jason. My sister is dead because of you." Her voice cut deep, and for the first time, Melissa's mask cracked.
The tears didn't fall this time.
Her face was frozen, exposed. And people noticed. The fire chief turned to me. "Did you know the risk of explosion?" he asked. I nodded. "I try to stop them," I said simply. "They wouldn't listen." "And you didn't go in yourself?" "No," I replied. "Because I checked the building twice. There was no one there. Not until they brought themselves in." A hush rippled through the crowd. A truth they had never allowed themselves to consider now lay at their feet, undeniable and ugly. The blame no longer hung around my neck like a noose. It was floating, weightless, searching for a new home. And it found Melissa. She trembled, lips moving without sound, eyes darting from face to face like a caged animal. "I didn't ask anyone to save me," she blurted. "I didn't tell them to come in. I was just sleeping." Her voice rose higher, cracking under pressure. "You can't blame me, but they could. And they would." Jason turned slowly toward her. There was something hollow in his eyes now, something broken. "Melissa," he said softly, Did you start this?" She recoiled.
What? No.
"How could you?" But he was already looking at me. "Claire, those cigarettes you took, were they hers?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was louder than anything I could say. The crowd began to move again, but not toward me this time. They encircled Melissa, questions lashing out like whips. "Did you smoke near the fabric room? Why were you the only one clean? Why didn't you scream for help?" She backed away, hands raised, voice shrill and shaking. "Stop. I didn't do anything." But the wind didn't stop. The fire didn't stop. And the truth didn't stop. Not this time. I took a step back and looked toward the horizon. The sun was gone now, swallowed by ash and regret. But in the dark, I could see something else, a flicker of justice, reborn like a phoenix in the smoke. This was only the beginning. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was finally ready to finish what had started in flames. The chaos didn't set light fermented, thickening in the air like smog after a chemical spill. The flames were finally under control, but the truth had only just started to burn. I stood a few paces from the crowd, watching the way suspicion began to ripple through them like a contagion. Melissa Zhang, once their fragile heroine, was now a question mark none of them knew how to carry. Her mascara had begun to run, not from heat but panic, and Jason, whose face had once held fire and fury for my so-called betrayal, now looked lost in the same crowd he'd led into damnation. But guilt doesn't always come crashing in like a wave. Sometimes it drips like a leak from the ceiling unnoticed until you're soaked in it. Melissa's voice broke through the rising murmur like a violin's strings snapping mid-note. "Jason, you have to believe me. I didn't ask anyone to go in. I didn't even know where I was. 1 minute I was working, the next I woke up surrounded by smoke. Why are you all looking at me like this?" Her eyes searched their faces, desperate for a lifeline. But there was no warmth left in their expressions, only a calculating chill. You could see the math ticking behind their eyes. 5 bodies, 1 survivor, 1 liar. It wasn't adding up in her favor anymore. Jason finally spoke, slowly, like he was forcing the words through a tight throat. "What about the cigarettes, Melissa? The ones Claire confiscated?" His voice cracked halfway through her name, but he didn't correct it. "She said they were yours." Melissa's mouth opened, but the sound died on her tongue. Her eyes darted toward me, then the firefighters, then the crowd. "That's ridiculous. You know I don't smoke. You've known me forever." Her hands clutched his sleeve like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. "I'm the one who was almost killed, Jason." I could see it now. The mask was slipping, not because of guilt, but because she didn't know how to exist without the safety of blind loyalty. When you build your life on being the victim, you forget how to stand when everyone stops carrying you. Jason pulled his arm away, slower than I expected, but definite. You weren't touched by the fire, he said, his voice lower now. Not a mark. Not a single hair out of place. The fire chief stepped forward, sweat glistening on his brow, voice cutting like a cleaver. We found cigarette butts at the origin point of the fire, partially burnt.
Zhonghua brand.
And I assume it won't surprise anyone here that smoking is strictly forbidden inside a textile factory, especially near the raw fabric room. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. I looked toward the lockers, the rows of metal cabinets where we stored personal items. If she'd hidden anything, that's where it would be. I want her locker searched, I said, my voice firm, steady. Right now. You'll find more than just cigarettes. The workers hesitated. The tension was too thick. No one wanted to be the one to touch it first, be the match that lit the next blaze. But one of the firefighters nodded to his team, and together they pried open the locker marked M.
Zhang.
The door squealed on its hinges, reluctant, like it too knew what lived inside. Gasps spread like wind through dry leaves. Inside were 3 packs of Zhonghua cigarettes, 2 disposable lighters, and a charred cloth wrapped around one of them, as if someone had tried to hide the evidence too late. Melissa took one step back. Then another. This is a setup, she shrieked. You all saw, Claire, she hates me. She's been jealous of me from the beginning. Of my relationship with Jason, of how everyone likes mesh planted those. The moment she said it, I knew she was done. You don't scream your innocence by crying about being liked. I walked toward her slowly, not out of triumph, but inevitability. You know what the real tragedy is, Melissa? I didn't even hate you. I pitied you. You could have had a real future if you stopped playing the victim long enough to build something. But you chose this. You lit that fire because you thought no one would ever doubt you. You gambled with 5 lives and lost. She lunged at me then, nails flashing like claws, face twisted into something no one could mistake for innocence. But before she reached me, 2 police officers caught her arms, holding her in place. Get off me. I didn't do anything. You're all sheep. She's lying. This is her revenge, she screamed, her voice cracking into raw noise. Her parents arrived seconds later, their expressions stricken and confused. Her mother fell to her knees, wailing, Melissa, tell me this isn't true. Why would you do this? But Melissa didn't answer. She only stared at the ground as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Jason didn't look at her. Not once. His eyes were fixed on the factory ruins, on the charred sky behind it, on something distant and irretrievable. I wondered if he was mourning the 5 women who died, or the idea of the woman he thought Melissa was. Either way, I didn't care. Not anymore. One of the factory owners, a portly man in a wrinkled suit, stepped forward, voice trembling. I think it's best if the facility is shut down indefinitely while the investigation continues. He didn't meet my eyes. No one did. Not Jenny, not the others who'd curse me, slap me, spit on my face while I bled. I didn't expect an apology. And honestly, I didn't want one. But then, quietly, someone stepped forward. It was Lisa, more the cousin of one of the dead women. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days, but her voice was steady. Claire, I remember now. You tried to stop us. You were the only one.
I'm sorry.
I should have said something sooner. Her words were met with silence, but this one wasn't cold. It was heavy, weighted with shame. I nodded. Just once. Thank you. It was all I said. The truth didn't need more than that. Melissa screamed again as they dragged her toward the squad car. She shrieked my name like it could still do damage. You think you've won? You're still nothing, Claire. Jason will never love you. You'll always be second to me. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even look back. Her words bounced off me like hail on steel. Love. That ship had sunk long ago, swallowed by the same flames she'd fed. Jason took a slow step toward me, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said quietly. Just don't. He paused, unsure, ashamed. Maybe for the first time in his life. Claire, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I interrupted. That's worse. And with that, I turned my back to them all. As I walked away from the factory, from the crowd, from the past, I didn't feel victorious. Just free. The kind of freedom that comes only after the truth has burned everything falls to the ground. I didn't need redemption from them. I never did. What I needed was this moment. The silence after the fire. The clarity after the smoke. And for the first time in 2 lives, I was walking into a future I chose for myself. The crowd hadn't fully dispersed. They lingered at the edge of the caution tape like moths circling a dead flame, unwilling to admit the blaze was over. Smoke still curled in slow, lazy spirals above the ruined factory, and though Melissa Zhang was already in the back of the squad car, her presence haunted the space like an echo that refused to fade. I stood on the curb, arms folded, head bowed just slightly, not in defeat but in contemplation. If grief had a sound, it would be the distant wail of an ambulance, the shuffling of guilt-heavy feet, the dull thud of regret as it settled into hearts that should have listened sooner. Jason hadn't moved since I walked away from him. He stood like a statue carved from shame, eyes vacant, shoulders sunken. The man who once dragged me by the collar and accused me of monstrous things now looked like he could barely hold up his own spine. But I didn't feel sorry for him. Not yet. Regret is only worth redemption if you earn it, and Jason Clark hadn't even started the process. A sudden rush of shouting snapped my attention to the front gate. 2 familiar voices rose above the noise, cutting through the static of murmurs like sharp knives. My parents. I turned just in time to see them push through the perimeter, flanked by several men in security uniforms. Our people. Their eyes locked on me instantly, and when they saw the bruises on my cheek, the dried blood on my lip, my mother's scream ripped through the crowd like a battle cry. Who did this to my daughter? All eyes turned. Some looked away in shame, others flinched. My mother was a force even the bravest of fools knew not to provoke. She was wearing her usual navy trench coat, her hair pinned back in a no-nonsense bun, and behind that stoic expression was a volcano of fury. My father followed close behind, eyes scanning every face, jaw tight with control he was clearly struggling to keep. Claire, he said, voice calm but cold. Who laid a hand on you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. It only took one glance at Jason for my father's gaze to narrow. But before he could speak, someone else beat him to it. Jenny Fox, her cheeks streaked with tears and ash, stepped forward with shaking hands. It wasn't just Jason, it was all of us. We thought she set the fire. We didn't know her voice cracked under the weight of her own words. We were wrong. My father exhaled through his nose, disappointment etched deep into every line of his face. Wrong, he repeated, eyes sweeping the crowd. You beat her. You shamed her in front of the entire community. You cursed her name and threatened her life. And now that you realize your darling Melissa was the wolf in sheep's clothing, you say you were just wrong? Someone in the back muttered. We didn't mean to, but no one finished the sentence. They didn't need to. The silence confessed for them. Then came a voice I hadn't expected, low, hoarse, hesitant. Mr. and Mrs.
Bennett, I didn't know.
I swear I didn't know. It was Melissa's mother, her mascara smudged, eyes bloodshot, hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. She stepped out of the police car's shadow, like a woman walking through glass barefoot. Please, we didn't raise her to be like this. She hid everything from us. The smoking, the lies, she broke into sobs. My husband's already collapsed at the station. We're just farmers. We didn't know what she was doing behind our backs. Please don't press charges. She's our only child. My mother didn't flinch. Her lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. And Claire is our only child too, she said quietly. And because of your daughter, we nearly lost her. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was final. Melissa's mother dropped to her knees. Please. She's all we have. But my father raised a hand. Then maybe you should have taught her that having everything doesn't mean trampling others to keep it. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, like thunder before the rain. Jason finally moved. He took one slow step toward me. His lips parted, a breath drawn in to speak, but no words came out. The apology stalled on his tongue, as useless as it was belated. Claire, I raised a hand, not in anger, but in dismissal. Don't, I said, soft but firm. I don't need an apology. I needed you to believe me when it mattered. That moment's long gone. He swallowed, his eyes shimmering with something that might have been remorse or just the realization of what he'd lost. I should have trusted you. You should have seen me, I replied, and the words felt heavier than stone. Not Melissa's shadow. Not the convenient villain.
Me.
The police officer standing near us cleared his throat. We're going to need everyone's statements. It's standard procedure in a case like this. He nodded at the remaining workers, now standing in uncomfortable clusters, trying to disappear into their own silence. Especially those involved in the earlier accusations. My father stepped closer to me and whispered, "Do you want us to make a formal case against them too?" His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the storm behind it. He wanted blood for what they'd done to me. I looked at the women, those who had once been under my direction, who had taken my discipline as cruelty, my structure as tyranny. They had misunderstood me,
Mocked me. Hurt me.
but they had also been manipulated, pawns in someone else's carefully staged performance. And the weight of 5 bodies in the rubble was already punishment enough. No, I said, voice steady. Let them carry it. That's heavier than anything prison can offer. The officers nodded and turned to collect statements. One by one, the workers followed some with trembling voices, others numb with the realization that they weren't just bystanders in a tragedy, but authors of it. I stood by the rusted gate of the factory I had once helped build from the ground up. It was nothing now but ash and memories. I could still hear the hum of the looms, the soft rhythm of fabric folding, the occasional burst of laughter in the break room when someone cracked a joke. Those things were gone now, replaced by the sting of smoke and betrayal. And yet, I didn't mourn the factory. I mourned the faith I had once placed in people who couldn't see beyond the shine of a false smile. As we prepared to leave, my mother wrapped her coat around my shoulders. Her hand trembled slightly as it brushed my arm, and for the first time all day, I saw fear in her eyes. When we heard what happened, she whispered, we thought we were going to lose you all over again. I froze. All over again?
I asked.
Her lips parted. My father looked away. That was when it hit me. The way they'd arrived just in time. The way they'd spoken with certainty, as if they already knew what was coming. You remembered, I whispered. You came back too. They didn't answer, but their silence was confirmation. My father placed a hand on my back and said quietly, "Not this time, sweetheart. Not again." I looked down at my scuffed shoes, the ground still dusty with ash, and felt the past finally loosen its grip around my throat. I had come full circle, but I wasn't trapped in it anymore. This time, I'd walked out of the fire.
Whole.
Vindicated.
Free.
The next morning, the factory grounds were cordoned off with yellow tape that fluttered like cautionary ribbons against the gray dawn. I stood behind the gate, the scent of scorched concrete still sharp in the air, mingling with dew and the cold bite of reality. Smoke stains streaked the building's husk like tear tracks down a hollow face. It looked as tired as I felt. This place had once held so much promise, a place where women earned their pride with calloused hands and quiet determination. Now it was just a graveyard of ambition and misplaced loyalty. I watched as a group of investigators entered with clipboards and cameras, their eyes scanning every detail, their feet leaving neat prints across the ash-covered floor. They didn't know the ghosts already whispered louder than evidence ever could. I should have left. I had no reason to be here anymore. But some part of me call it duty, call it vengeance, call it something uglier, wanted to witness the full unraveling of the lie. I wanted to see the truth carved into stone, not whispered behind hands or washed away in shallow apologies. And as if summoned by that very thought, the fire chief approached with slow, purposeful steps, a sealed evidence bag in his hand. Inside it were two things, a scorched lighter and a twisted metal keyring tagged with Melissa's locker number. "You were right," he said quietly. "Her fingerprints are all over this. It matches the lighter found near the ignition point. The brand's identical to the ones pulled from her locker." He paused, eyes narrowing. But the real clincher, one of our investigators found a discarded cigarette just outside the window near the back office. Shoe prints leading in bit, none leading out. I met his gaze, my voice cool. She slipped in before shift change. Hid while the others came in. Lit up. Lost control. Then staged her own rescue. "And got others killed," he finished, his jaw clenched. I looked away, letting my eyes settle on the workers' brake shed. Its roof now collapsed, mugs still perched on a melted plastic table as if waiting for a lunch break that would never come. "Some of them still think she's innocent," I muttered. "Still see her as this gentle, selfless girl who loved them. It's easier than accepting they chose a snake over the woman trying to protect them." The chief didn't answer. He didn't need to. That silence, heavy, reluctant, weary, was something I'd grown used to. Just then, a commotion erupted near the front gates. A cluster of women had gathered, some familiar, some not. Their faces were a patchwork of guilt, grief, and hesitation. At the front of the group stood Jenny Fox, her hands clutched around a bouquet of wildflowers, half-wilted, as if plucked in panic. She stepped forward, shoulders drawn in tight. "Claire," she began, her voice hoarse. We came to say sorry." I didn't move. Let her carry the weight a little longer. Let her feel the silence I had been buried in while they cheered Melissa like a saint. Jenny swallowed hard and gestured behind her. "We didn't know what we were doing. We thought we were standing by the right person, but we weren't. We were cruel. We were blind. And some of us," she hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the charred factory, "some of us paid the ultimate price for that mistake." A few of the women behind her began to cry, the kind of sobs that stemmed not from mourning the dead, but from the crushing realization that they had helped bury them. One of them, Lisa Moore, stepped forward. "You trained us," she said quietly. "You were tough, but you were fair. You wanted us to succeed. We thought you were cold, but now I see you were trying to make us strong." I exhaled slowly. Their words weren't empty, but they came with no promise. Regret doesn't rewind time. It only reveals how wrong you were when it's already too late to change what's been done. My mother, who had arrived shortly after with a thermos in hand, watched the scene unfold from the sidelines. She said nothing, but I caught the subtle nod of approval when I finally stepped forward and spoke. "You all made your choices," I said, my voice like the wind measured, cutting real. "You chose drama over duty. Sympathy over safety. You threw your trust behind a woman who smiled prettily while standing on a pile of lies." My eyes swept across their faces, not with cruelty, but clarity. "I told you to evacuate. I begged you to stop. You spat on me, hit me, called me a murderer. No one dared to look away. And now, you come with flowers and apologies. But what about the 5 women who will never get another chance to speak for themselves?" I pointed toward the building, to the place where the explosion had gutted lives like paper. "Your guilt is yours to carry. I won't take it from you. I don't need your forgiveness, and I'm not handing out absolution." Jenny's lip trembled. "So you won't ever forgive us?" I paused, then shrugged. "Maybe someday. Maybe not. But not because you asked. Forgiveness isn't something you get for convenience. It's something you earn by living better." They stood there a moment longer, until finally Jenny stepped forward and laid the flowers at the gate. Not on the memorial board, not beside the others, just on the concrete. For the living, not the dead. That, at least, was something. As they left, I turned to my mother and accepted the thermos. She gave me a half-smile, her voice low. "You didn't have to come back here today." I unscrewed the cap and took a sip. Green tea, still hot, still grounding. "I did," I said. Closure isn't something handed to you. It's something you watch fall apart, brick by brick, until all that's left is clarity. She reached out and brushed a smudge of soot off my jawline. And now, I smiled faintly. Now I rebuild. Justice, when it finally came, arrived not with sirens or handcuffs but with paperwork, signatures, courtroom silences, and the long, slow disintegration of reputation. Melissa Zhang's trial was publicized like a cautionary tale, and despite her desperate pleas and her mother's emotional appeals, the evidence was ironclad. Her fingerprints, the surveillance gaps, the smuggled cigarettes, and above all, the eyewitness testimonies too many, too detailed, too late to save her. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. The courtroom was packed the day the verdict was read, but I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I already saw her fall once in fire, in lies, in the eyes of those she had fooled. Watching her be sentenced by strangers would have felt redundant. My justice came the moment she realized her mask could no longer be sewn back together with tears. Jason Clark, once my boyfriend, once the golden boy of the textile district, didn't escape untouched either. Though he wasn't charged as an arsonist, his reckless leadership and direct involvement in the beatings that nearly killed me landed him a 10-year sentence for assault and negligence causing death. He tried to reach out from prison. Sent letters I never read. One of them ended up in my mailbox, an apology smeared with ink and shame, but I dropped it into the fireplace without a second glance. If he needed forgiveness, he could find it elsewhere. I owed him nothing but the silence he never gave me when I begged him to believe the truth. The factory was shut down.
Permanently.
The ownership shares, once spread across half a dozen investors, were quietly purchased by my father's holding company and absorbed into a new venture, an education and training center for women in skilled labor industries. Not just sewing and textiles, but design, engineering, and management. A place where women could become more than background characters in someone else's glory. My father asked if I wanted to oversee it. I declined. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew my energy belonged somewhere else. I chose to move away from the city. Somewhere coastal. A small town with wind chimes on porches and sunsets that painted the world in watercolor. I bought a modest home near the cliffs, where the air tasted like salt and the ocean was always murmuring secrets. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I grew a garden. I drank tea in silence. I walked every morning before sunrise. People there didn't know my story. I didn't tell it. That part of me belonged to the ashes. Then, one evening, as the tide pulled back and the sky turned violet, I received an unexpected visitor. Jenny Fox. She stood at my gate in jeans and a sweater, holding a box with trembling fingers. I hadn't seen her since the day they laid the flowers at the factory gate. Her eyes had changed softer, heavier. "I wasn't sure if you'd slam the door in my face," she said, her voice as fragile as the breeze. I didn't. I let her in. We sat on my porch. She handed me the box. Inside were scraps of fabric-burned edges, some embroidered, some untouched. We salvaged these from the storeroom. The ones that didn't burn. Thought maybe you'd want to do something with them. I ran my fingers along the edges, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something gentle bloom in my chest. Not forgiveness, not fully, but the beginning of something like peace.
"Thank you," I said.
We didn't talk about the factory. We didn't talk about Melissa or Jason or the trial. We talked about tomatoes. About how hard it was to get good soil near the coast. About how silence can be its own form of healing. She left before sunset, and I didn't ask if she'd come again. That night, I took one of the embroidered pieces and stitched it into a quilt I'd been making bright colors against a field of charcoal gray. A symbol of survival, perhaps. Or just something warm for the colder months. Time passed. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just honestly. I didn't rebuild my past, didn't pretend none of it happened. I kept a single photo from the factory on my bookshelf, not to mourn what was lost, but to remember what I overcame. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing at it without thinking, my gaze resting on the faces of the women I once led, once fought for, once begged to listen. I didn't hate them anymore. I just hoped they learned. That was all I ever wanted. Not gratitude. Not applause. Just growth. One morning, I walked to the shore and saw 5 white stones lined perfectly in the sand. I didn't place them. No one claimed them. But I knew what they meant. 5 lives. 5 memories. 5 voices silenced not by fire, but by misjudgment and pride. I knelt beside them and whispered their names not for them, but for me. I carried them every day in my spine, in my breath, in the decisions I made. And I promised, quietly, fiercely, never to let the world forget what arrogance costs. In the end, the fire didn't destroy me.
It revealed me.
It stripped away the expectations, the roles, the sacrifices I was expected to make without question. It burned through the lies others told about me and the ones I told myself. I wasn't just a forewoman. I wasn't just someone's girlfriend. I wasn't just a girl who got caught in someone else's storm. I was the woman who walked through fire and kept walking.